Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The bass pulsed through the floor of Club Enigma, each beat matching the rhythm of Elena Winslow's racing heart. Neon lights carved through the darkness, painting abstract patterns across the faces of her co-workers as they celebrated another record-breaking quarter. The nightclub's VIP section, reserved exclusively for their office party, buzzed with an electric energy that made her feel more alive than she had in months. Music thundered from speakers mounted on walls draped with shimmering fabric, while laser lights danced across the crowd in mesmerizing patterns of blue and purple. The air was thick with a mingled sense of expensive perfume, spilled cocktails, and possibility. Behind the marble-topped bar, mixologists in black vests performed elaborate routines with shakers and bottles, crafting drinks that glowed under the ultraviolet lights. Elena caught her reflection in one of the mirrored walls, her sleek black dress hugging curves she'd usually keep hidden beneath conservative office attire, her dark hair falling in loose waves past her shoulders. At 32, she still turned heads, though lately, the only head she wanted to turn seemed permanently fixed on spreadsheets and client meetings. She watched her co-workers letting loose on the dance floor. Jessica from accounting was grinding against Tom from IT, their usual professional demeanor dissolved by premium vodka and pulsing rhythms. Even stern-faced Barbara from HR was laughing, her blazer discarded, swaying with a glass of wine in hand. "Girl, you are way too gorgeous to be standing here alone." Maria, her closest work friend, appeared at her elbow with 2 fresh martinis. "Here, drink this. Doctor's orders." Elena accepted the glass, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. "Thanks. I was just thinking maybe I should head home soon." "Home?" Maria's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. "It's barely midnight. Besides, have you seen the way Roman's been watching you all night?" He crept up Elena's neck. "He hasn't been watching me." "Oh, please." Maria rolled her eyes. "He's barely taken his eyes off you since you walked in wearing that dress. And can you blame him? You look smoking hot tonight." Elena's wedding ring felt heavy on her finger as she thought of Cyrus, probably still at his desk, buried in work as usual. Her mild-mannered husband of 5 years, always so predictable. Their marriage had settled into a comfortable routine, or maybe comfortable wasn't the right word. Maybe routine was all that was left. Cyrus wouldn't approve, she murmured, more to herself than Maria. "Honey, Cyrus wouldn't approve of breathing if it wasn't in an Excel spreadsheet." Maria's words were harsh, but her tone was gentle. "When was the last time he even noticed you? Really noticed you?" The question stung because Elena couldn't remember. Their conversations lately revolved around bills, schedules, and whose turn it was to pick up dry cleaning. When had they last danced? When had he last looked at her the way Roman did? Like she was something precious and dangerous all at once? "It's not his fault," Elena defended weakly. "The Morton account is taking up all his time. He's working so hard to what? To buy more time away from his beautiful wife." Maria squeezed her arm. "You deserve to feel wanted, Elena. You deserve to feel alive." Elena took a long sip of her martini, letting the alcohol warm her blood and quiet the whisper of guilt in her mind. The vodka was top shelf, the kind Cyrus would say was unnecessarily expensive. Everything about tonight felt unnecessarily expensive. The club, the open bar, the way success and power hung in the air like an intoxicating perfume. She watched Roman across the room, commanding attention without effort. He stood with a group of executives, his custom-tailored suit emphasizing broad shoulders that spoke of regular sessions with his personal trainer. Unlike Cyrus's careful, measured gestures, Roman moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own power. 5 years ago, fresh out of business school, she would have never imagined working directly under someone like Roman Kincaid. He'd built his company from nothing, turning a small tech startup into a corporate empire through sheer force of will and ruthless ambition. The media called him a shark, a predator, a corporate raider. In the office, his reputation for demanding excellence was matched only by rumors of his appetites for power, for pleasure, for pushing boundaries. "Mrs. Winslow." The deep voice behind her sent a shiver down her spine. "You're not planning to leave the party early, are you?" Maria shot her a knowing look and melted away into the crowd, leaving Elena alone with her boss. She turned to face him, fighting to keep her expression professional despite the vodka humming in her veins. "Actually, I was thinking about heading home soon," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Cyrus is buried in work as usual?" Roman moved closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, something woodsy and dark that made her think of secret things done in shadows. "You deserve better than being neglected on a night like this. Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Roman's hand was already at the small of her back, guiding her toward the dance floor. The heat of his palm burned through the thin fabric of her dress, sending sparks of electricity racing along her spine. Her protest died in her throat as the DJ switched to a slower, more sensual beat. The crowd seemed to part before them, creating a small bubble of space in the center of the dance floor. Elena felt the weight of watching eyes, her co-workers pretending not to stare as their CEO pulled a married employee close. The danger of it, the forbidden thrill, made her head spin more than the alcohol. "I shouldn't," she managed, even as her body betrayed her, swaying in time with his movements. The music wound around them like silk, bass so deep she could feel it in her chest, matching the thundering of her heart. "You should do whatever makes you feel alive." Roman's breath was warm against her ear, his stubble grazing her cheek. One hand slid lower on her back, proprietary, while the other caught her fingers in a grip that was just shy of too tight. "When was the last time Cyrus made you feel like this?" The question hit harder than the alcohol in her system. When was the last time? The memories of quiet dinners and gentle kisses seemed pale compared to the fire burning through her veins right now. Cyrus was safety, security, the known path. But here in Roman's arms, with danger and desire crackling between them like electricity, she felt something she'd almost forgotten she felt. Real. "He works hard," she defended weakly, but even to her own ears, it sounded hollow. The words were automatic, rehearsed, like so much of her life had become. "We all work hard." Roman's hand slid lower, just shy of inappropriate, fingers spreading possessively across her hip. "But some of us know how to play hard too. Some of us know how to make every moment count." They moved together, their bodies growing closer with each beat. The music wound through her blood like a drug, making everything sharper and softer at the same time. Roman's cologne, the heat of his skin, the strength in his hands, it all blurred together into a dangerous cocktail of sensation. "Your husband," Roman continued, his lips brushing against her ear with each word. "He's content with his safe little life. But you're not, are you, Elena? I see it in your eyes at the office. You want more. You need more." Her head spun, and not just from the martinis. Every word he spoke struck a chord deep inside her, resonating with thoughts she'd been afraid to acknowledge even to herself. How long had she been sleepwalking through her life, telling herself that contentment was enough? "I don't know what I want anymore." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, raw and honest in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "Yes, you do." Roman's grip tightened possessively, almost painful but thrilling in its intensity. "You want to feel dangerous. Wanted. Alive." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and the hunger she saw there made her breath catch. "A few of us are continuing the party somewhere more private. The executive washroom has certain advantages." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Elena knew what he was suggesting, had heard the whispered rumors about Roman's private parties, about the lines that got crossed behind closed doors. The rational part of her brain screamed at her to leave, to go home to her husband, to remember her vows. But another part, a part that had been suffocating in the safety of her marriage, urged her to take the risk. Who else? The question surprised even her, but there was no taking it back now that Roman's smile was predatory, all white teeth and dark intent. Just a select few who know how to keep secrets. Marcus from legal, James from acquisitions. People who understand the value of discretion. His thumb traced circles on her hip, each touch a promise of things to come. People like us, who need more than ordinary life can offer. The music seemed to fade into the background as Elena stood at the crossroads of her life. Time stretched like warm honey, each heartbeat an eternity as she weighed her options. One path led home to Cyrus, to security and comfort and predictability. The other path, she looked up into Roman's dark eyes, saw the promise of dangerous delights waiting there. "Show me," she whispered, and watched triumph flash across Roman's face. Quick and fierce as lightning, he took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt more intimate than the dancing had been. As he led her through the crowd, Elena caught glimpses of her co-workers' faces, some curious, others knowing, a few disapproving. Maria caught her eye and gave her a small nod. Though something like worry flickered across her friend's face, the hallway leading to the executive washroom was dimly lit, the music muffled to a distant throb. Each step felt weighted with significance, like she was walking deeper into a dream or maybe a nightmare. Roman's hand was warm and sure in hers, guiding her past doors marked private and staff only. The executive washroom was larger than she'd imagined, a testament to Club Enigma's exclusive clientele. Black marble stretched from floor to ceiling, broken only by gold fixtures that caught and reflected the soft lighting. The air was cooler here, raising goosebumps on her bare arms. Marcus and James were already there, along with 3 other men she recognized from the executive floor, but whose names escaped her. They lounged against the counters, drinks in hand, their ties loosened and sleeves rolled up. Their eyes followed her as she entered, hungry and appraising. "Gentlemen," Roman announced, his voice carrying that natural authority that made junior associates scramble to attention. "Mrs. Winslow has decided to join our little after-party." Marcus raised his glass, a knowing smirk playing at his lips. "Welcome to the inner circle, Elena." A woman Elena didn't recognize emerged from one of the private stalls, dabbing at her nose with a tissue. She was young, probably fresh out of college, wearing a dress that cost more than most entry-level employees made in a month. "Roman, darling, you didn't tell me we were having new friends tonight." "Katerina," Roman introduced smoothly. "Meet Elena. She's my new favorite project manager." His hand slid possessively down Elena's spine. "And she's ready to see how the other half lives, aren't you, sweetheart?" Before Elena could respond, James appeared with a crystal glass filled with golden champagne. "Here," he said, "liquid courage. Best money can buy." The champagne bubbles tickled her nose as she took a sip. It was excellent, probably worth hundreds per bottle. Everything about this room spoke of excess. The marble, the gold, the designer clothes, the premium liquor. It was a world away from the careful budgeting she did with Cyrus, their shared spreadsheet tracking every expense. Someone had connected a phone to hidden speakers, filling the room with music different from the club outside, something darker, more primal. Katerina swayed to the beat, her movements liquid and practiced. The men watched her with varying degrees of obvious interest. "Dance with her," Roman murmured in Elena's ear, giving her a gentle push toward Katerina. "Show us what you can do." The champagne hummed in her blood as Elena moved toward the other woman. This wasn't like dancing with Roman. This was performance, spectacle, crossing a line she hadn't even known existed an hour ago. Katerina's hands found her hips, guiding her into the rhythm. "First time?" Katerina whispered, her lips close to Elena's ear. "Don't worry, honey. Roman takes good care of his favorites." The next hour dissolved into a blur of sensation and surrender. More champagne appeared whenever her glass emptied. Hands touched her with increasing boldness. Roman's possessive grip, Katerina's playful caresses, others she couldn't or didn't want to identify. The marble walls multiplied their reflections, until Elena saw herself from every angle, this wild, wanton version of herself she'd never known existed. "You're even more beautiful when you let go," Roman whispered, his chest pressed against her back as they watched Katerina dance with Marcus. "When you stop pretending to be satisfied with less than what you deserve." The door burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. Fluorescent light from the hallway flooded in, harsh and unforgiving after the dim intimacy of their private party. Elena blinked, trying to focus through the alcoholic haze, and felt her heart stop. Cyrus stood in the doorway, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Elena?" The music continued to play, but all other sounds seemed to vanish from the world. Elena stared at her husband, seeing him as if from a great distance, his rumpled dress shirt untucked from dark slacks, the gift bag clutched in his right hand, the raw hurt etched into every line of his face. "What are you doing here?" The words came out sharp, defensive, her guilt transmuting instantly to anger. How dare he show up here, in this private moment? How dare he look at her with those wounded eyes? "It's my birthday." Cyrus's voice was quiet, controlled, but she could see him trembling. "I finished work early. Thought I'd surprise you." He looked around the room, taking in the scene. His wife in another man's arms, the obvious debauchery of the private party, the way Katerina was still draped over Marcus by the sinks. "I've been calling, texting." Elena's phone lay forgotten in her purse, probably filled with missed messages. She hadn't even remembered it was his birthday. The realization should have brought shame, but instead it fueled her anger. Of course he would choose tonight to break his workaholic habits. Of course he would ruin this one moment she had claimed for herself. "You should leave." Roman's voice cut through the tension, cold and dismissive. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Elena. "Your wife is busy." "Elena." Cyrus took a step into the room, ignoring Roman completely. His eyes fixed on hers, searching for something recognition, remorse, the woman he'd married. "Please, come home. Whatever this is, we can talk about it." For a moment, Elena wavered. She saw the life they'd built together, the love that had once seemed enough. She remembered their wedding day, how sure she'd been that they would beat the odds, that their love was different, stronger. But then she felt Roman's hands tighten on her waist, felt the thrill of danger and desire, and something cruel twisted inside her. "Go home, Cyrus." She leaned back against Roman's chest, letting her head fall against his shoulder in a deliberately intimate gesture. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Roman laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "You heard the lady. Now get out before what?" Cyrus's quiet challenge surprised them all. He stepped fully into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. The gift bag dangled from his fingers, forgotten but not dropped. The atmosphere shifted, testosterone and alcohol creating a dangerous cocktail. Roman's expression darkened as he released Elena and stalked towards Cyrus. His larger frame towered over her husband, muscles tense beneath his expensive suit. "Before I teach you what happens to men who don't know their place." The first punch caught Cyrus in the jaw, sending him stumbling backward. The gift bag fell, something inside shattering on impact, the sound of breaking glass oddly musical against the marble floors. Roman followed, delivering another blow that sent Cyrus to the ground. Blood bloomed at the corner of Cyrus's mouth, bright red against his pale skin. He tried to push himself up, but Roman's foot caught him in the ribs, drawing a grunt of pain that sent an unexpected thrill through Elena's body. "Not so proper now, are you?" Roman kicked him again, his polished shoe leaving scuff marks on Cyrus's white shirt. "This is what happens when you try to hold on to something that doesn't want to be held." The others watched with varying degrees of interest, Marcus and James exchanging knowing looks, Katerina sipping her champagne with practiced indifference. This wasn't the first time they'd seen Roman assert his dominance, Elena realized. This was just another night of entertainment for them. Blood trickled from Cyrus's split lip, staining the white marble floor. He tried to stand again, only to be knocked down by another casual blow from Roman. Through it all, his eyes never left Elena's face, that a laugh bubbled up from Elena's throat, fueled by champagne and cruelty. "You should have stayed at work, honey. It's what you're good at." The others joined in her laughter, the sound bouncing off the marble walls like broken glass. But something in Cyrus's eyes made her pause, something that didn't match his beaten position on the floor. There was no weakness there, no defeat. Instead, she saw something cold and calculating, something that made her wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. But then Roman was pulling her back to the party, pressing another glass into her hand. "Let him crawl home," he said, loud enough for Cyrus to hear. "He should thank me for showing him what his wife really needs." They danced and drank until dawn, leaving Cyrus's blood to dry on the marble floor. The night stretched on in a haze of champagne and increasingly bold touches, But somewhere in the back of Elena's mind, she couldn't shake the memory of that look in Cyrus's eyes, not when Roman had first hit him, but after, when something cold and dangerous had replaced the hurt hours later. As the sun began to rise over the city, Roman led her to his waiting car. Elena collapsed into the leather seats, her head spinning with alcohol and adrenaline. As they drove toward his penthouse, she caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. Mascara smeared, lipstick gone, hair wild, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she'd finally become who she was meant to be, leaving behind the constraints of her marriage, and the woman Cyrus had thought she was. The city blurred past the windows, and Elena closed her eyes, letting the motion lull her toward unconsciousness. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Cyrus's eyes, not wounded, not defeated, but filled with a cold promise that sent a shiver down her spine. Even in memory, something told her this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Screaming jolted Elena awake. Her head pounded as consciousness slammed into her like a freight train, every nerve ending raw and oversensitive. Sunlight stabbed through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Roman's penthouse into a brutal landscape of white and chrome. "Where is it?" Roman's voice thundered from somewhere nearby. Something crashed, glass shattering, metal hitting marble. "Where the fuck is it?" Elena pushed herself up from the leather couch, where she'd apparently passed out, still wearing last night's dress. Her mouth felt like sandpaper, and her makeup had left dark smudges on the expensive upholstery. She tried to piece together how she'd gotten here, but everything after leaving the club was a blur of street lights and leather seats. "I said, where is it?" Roman stormed into the living room, his usual polished appearance nowhere to be seen. His dress shirt was wrinkled, partially untucked, and a vein pulsed in his forehead. Behind him, Marcus and James hovered uncertainly, both looking worse for wear. "What's going on?" Elena's voice came out raspy. She spotted her clutch on a nearby table and reached for it, desperate for her phone. For some connection to normality, Roman rounded on her. And for the first time, she saw the dangerous predator that lived behind his carefully maintained facade of corporate civility. "My watch. My fucking Patek Philippe. It's gone? Maybe you left it at the club?" James suggested, only to back away when Roman whirled toward him. "Left it? Left my $100,000 watch at a fucking club?" Roman grabbed a crystal tumbler from the bar and hurled it against the wall. It exploded in a shower of glass. "Someone took it. Someone in this room took it." Elena's head spun as she tried to process what was happening. "Roman, calm down. We can. Calm down?" He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, looming over her. "You want me to calm down? That watch was worth more than you make in a year. More than your pathetic husband makes in 2 years. The mention of Cyrus sent a jolt through her system. Fragments of memory crashed back the party in the executive washroom. Cyrus appearing in the doorway, Roman's fists connecting with his face. The look in Cyrus's eyes before they'd left him bleeding on the marble floor. "Don't talk about my husband," she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. That Roman's laugh was ugly. "Your husband? The same husband you were so eager to forget last night? The one you laughed at while I put him in his place?" He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Or maybe you're not as done with him as you pretended. Maybe this was all a setup. Let go of me." Elena tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened. "Boss." Marcus stepped forward, his face tight with concern. "Maybe we should all take a breath. Figure this out calmly." "Calmly?" Roman's other hand shot out, catching Elena's jaw in a painful grip. "You want calm? Fine. Let's be calm. Mrs. Winslow here is going to tell us exactly what happened to my watch. Aren't you, sweetheart?" The endearment dripped with venom. Elena stared into his eyes and saw nothing of the charming, powerful man who'd swept her onto the dance floor last night. This was something else entirely, something raw and violent that had been hiding behind designer suits and corporate power plays. "I don't know anything about your watch," she said, forcing each word out past the pressure of his fingers. "You're hurting me." "Hurting you?" His grip tightened further. "You haven't begun to understand hurt. Not yet. Now tell me, did you and your husband plan this? Was this whole thing a setup? What?" The accusation was so absurd it cut through her fear. You think I orchestrated this? You're the one who what? Roman's face was inches from hers now, his breath hot against her skin. Who showed you what you really wanted? Who gave you a taste of life beyond your boring little marriage? Who made you feel alive? Who showed his true colors? Elena spat back. Something of Cyrus's coldness must have seeped into her, because she felt her fear transforming into anger. Is this what you do? Get women drunk, get them compromised, and then show what a monster you really are? The slap caught her off guard, snapping her head to the side. The sound seemed to freeze everyone in the room. Marcus and James exchanged worried glances, while Katerina, who had been silently watching from a corner, took a step toward the door. Boss, James said carefully, maybe we should. Shut up. Roman didn't take his eyes off Elena. All of you get out. Mrs. Winslow, and I need to have a private conversation about consequences. I slid down Elena's spine. The others hesitated, clearly torn between self-preservation and concern. She saw the moment they made their choice, saw them edge toward the door, avoiding her eyes. Don't, she said, hating the pleading note in her voice. Don't leave me alone with him. Sorry, honey, Katerina whispered as she slipped past. You should have stayed with your husband. The door closed behind them with a quiet click that seemed to echo through the penthouse. Roman finally released her, only to grab a handful of her hair instead, using it to force her head back. Now then, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Let's talk about what happens to people who steal from me. I didn't steal anything. Elena's scalp burned where he gripped her hair. You're paranoid. I'm what? His other hand traced down her throat, a parody of gentleness. Dangerous? Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Roman's grip tightened painfully in her hair. If you make a sound, he whispered, you'll regret it for the rest of your very short life. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Roman dragged her closer to the door, keeping her mouth covered with his free hand. Through the peephole, they could see who waited in the hallway. Cyrus stood there, looking perfectly composed despite the bruises darkening his jaw. His suit was fresh, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes gleaming. Only the split in his lip betrayed last night's violence. I know you're in there, Roman, he called, his voice carrying clearly through the door. We need to talk. Roman's grip tightened in Elena's hair as another knock echoed through the penthouse. She could feel his heart pounding where his chest pressed against her back, his breath coming quick and harsh against her ear. Open the door, Roman. Cyrus's voice remained steady, almost casual. We both know this ends better for you if we handle it privately. Handle what? Roman called back, keeping his hand firmly over Elena's mouth. Last I checked, you were picking yourself up off a bathroom floor. Last you checked, you were wearing an extremely expensive watch. A pause, then the sound of something being placed against the door. The same watch currently sitting in a police evidence locker. Roman went perfectly still. You're bluffing. Am I? Metal scraped against wood. Cyrus leaning against the door frame, Elena guessed. While you were busy showing off for your friends, I was recording everything on my phone. The assault, the threats, the drugs. Amazing what modern phones can capture in low light. You little... Roman's grip loosened slightly as rage overtook caution. Elena seized her chance. She bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth, tasting copper as her teeth broke skin. Roman cursed and shoved her away. She stumbled but kept her feet, scrambling toward the door. I'll kill you, Roman snarled, but she couldn't tell if he was threatening her or Cyrus. I'll destroy you both. Cyrus. Elena's fingers found the door handle. Cyrus, help. Roman lunged for her, but she'd already thrown the lock and yanked the door open. She practically fell into the hallway, expecting to feel Roman's hands grabbing her at any moment. Instead, she heard a grunt and the impact of bodies colliding. Cyrus stood in the doorway, blocking Roman's path. Despite being shorter and lighter, he held his ground with a fighter's stance that Elena had never seen before. You okay? Cyrus asked without taking his eyes off Roman. Elena touched her jaw where Roman had grabbed her, feeling the tender spots that would become bruises. He's crazy. He thinks we stole his watch. Oh, I'd take his watch. Cyrus's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. Right after he knocked me down. Figured it would make good evidence along with the video. Roman's face contorted with fury. You manipulative piece of... Careful. Cyrus held up his phone. Still recording. But please, by all means, dig yourself deeper. You think you can blackmail me? Roman took a step forward, his height advantage more pronounced as they faced each other. I own half the judges in this city. One phone call, and any evidence you have disappears. That would be more threatening if I hadn't already uploaded everything to a secure server. Cyrus smiled, and there was nothing gentle about it. The assault, the drugs, the after-party debauchery, it's all safely backed up. One click, and it goes to every news outlet in the country. Elena stared at her husband, seeing him as if for the first time. This wasn't the mild-mannered accountant who spent his evenings with spreadsheets. This was someone else entirely, someone calculating and dangerous in his own right. You're lying. But uncertainty had crept into Roman's voice. Want to test that theory? Cyrus took out his phone, thumbs moving across the screen. Let's see. Send to Channel 4 News, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Wait. Roman's composure cracked. What do you want? First, you're going to step back and let me in. Then we're going to have a civilized conversation about consequences. Roman hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he stepped aside, allowing Cyrus to enter the penthouse. Elena followed, keeping Cyrus between herself and Roman. The morning sun threw harsh light across the scene. Broken glass from Roman's earlier outburst, scattered cushions, the signs of violence barely contained by luxury. Cyrus surveyed it all with clinical detachment. Nice place, he commented, straightening his tie. Bet the board of directors would love to see what goes on up here. Name your price. Roman moved toward his desk, probably reaching for his checkbook. Everyone has one. I'm not interested in your money. Cyrus's voice hardened. I'm interested in justice. In consequences. Roman laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Justice? For what? Your wife came to me willingly. She chose this. Did she choose this morning's entertainment? Cyrus gestured to the bruises forming on Elena's arm. Did she choose to be assaulted and threatened? I never. Save it for your lawyers. Cyrus held up his phone again. The police are already on their way. They're very interested in the drug use that seems to be a regular feature of your private parties. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Roman's face went from red to white in an instant. You can't do this. He took a step towards Cyrus, hands clenching into fists. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. Maybe. Cyrus didn't flinch. But your reputation, your company, your freedom, they'll all be gone long before you can touch me. The sirens were very close now. Roman's control finally snapped. With a roar of rage, he charged at Cyrus. Leading with a punch that would have taken his head off if it had landed, Cyrus moved with surprising speed, stepping inside Roman's reach. His own punch caught Roman in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As Roman doubled over, Cyrus brought his knee up into his face, blood sprayed from Roman's nose. But he recovered quickly, grabbing Cyrus in a bear hug and trying to use his superior size to his advantage. They crashed into the desk, sending papers and electronics flying. Stop it! Elena screamed. But neither man paid her any attention. Cyrus broke Roman's grip with a sharp elbow to the ribs, following up with a combination of strikes that spoke of serious training. Roman stumbled back, his earlier confidence replaced by growing fear as he realized he was outmatched. All those hours at the gym, Cyrus said, advancing steadily. All that time building muscles for show. Did you ever learn to actually fight? Or do you only hit people who can't hit back? Roman's answer was to grab a heavy crystal decanter from the bar and swing it like a club. Cyrus caught his wrist, twisted, and the decanter crashed to the floor. The next moment, Roman joined it. Taken down by a sweep to his legs, Cyrus knelt on Roman's chest, one hand fisted in his shirt collar. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. You're finished. The recording, the watch, the drugs in your private bathroom, it's all going to the police. Your reputation is over. Your company will distance themselves to avoid the scandal. Everything you've built is going to crumble. Please, Roman wheezed, his arrogance finally deserting him. I'll give you anything. I told you, I don't want your money. Cyrus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that Elena barely caught. I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be helpless. Remember what it's like to face someone stronger than you. The sound of multiple footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of the police. Cyrus stood, straightening his suit with precise movements. Roman remained on the floor, blood streaming from his nose. The fight completely gone from him, Elena watched as the police burst in, weapons drawn. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Roman being cuffed, evidence being collected, statements being taken. Through it all, Cyrus remained perfectly composed, handling questions with the same quiet confidence he'd shown throughout the confrontation. Finally, he turned to her. The coldness in his eyes made her take a step back. "You're just as guilty as he is," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've already filed for divorce. My lawyer will contact you, but don't expect to see a cent of my money. I've made sure of that." Cyrus, but what could she say? Sorry for betraying you? Sorry for laughing while you were beaten? Sorry for discovering that I didn't know you at all? Save it? He turned away, speaking to one of the officers. "I think you'll find evidence of cocaine in the master bathroom." Mr. Kincaid's associates were quite busy last night, as Roman was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that he could fix everything with one phone call. Elena stood alone in the wreckage of the penthouse. The morning sun felt too bright, too revealing, highlighting every poor decision that had led to this moment. She watched Cyrus walk away, his steps unhurried, his shoulders straight. He didn't look back once. The man she dismissed as predictable and boring had just systematically destroyed one of the most powerful men in the city. And he'd done it all without losing his composure or his dignity. The true horror wasn't that she betrayed him. It was that she'd never really known him at all. 2 weeks later, Elena sat in her lawyer's office, staring at divorce papers that seemed to mock her with their clinical precision. The morning sun slanted through Venetian blinds, cutting sharp lines across the mahogany desk between her and Patricia Martinez, the only divorce attorney who'd agreed to take her case. "Mrs. Winslow," Patricia began, then corrected herself. "Elena, you need to understand your position here. Your husband has been thorough." "What do you mean, thorough?" Elena's fingers traced the edge of the papers, her wedding ring conspicuously absent. The tan line where it had been felt like an accusation. Patricia leaned forward, her expression carefully neutral. "In the past 2 weeks, Mr. Kane has provided evidence that you participated in illegal activities at Roman Kincaid's private party. While he's chosen not to pursue criminal charges, the documentation exists." "He wouldn't." "He already has." Patricia tapped a folder on her desk. "He's also provided proof that you knew about Mr. Kincaid's inappropriate business practices. Emails, text messages, things you probably don't even remember sending." Elena's mouth went dry. "That's not possible. I never. You did." Patricia's voice was firm, but not unkind. "After a few drinks, you sent some very detailed messages about what you suspected was happening at those executive meetings. Messages that implicate you in knowledge of corporate fraud." The room seemed to tilt sideways as Elena remembered fragments of late-night conversations, complaints about Roman's shadier dealings that she'd texted to friends after too many glasses of wine. She'd thought she was being clever, sophisticated, in the know. Now those messages were weapons turned against her. "What are my options?" Patricia pushed the papers closer. "Sign these. Accept the terms. Walk away with enough to start over somewhere else. That's your best option. Probably your only option. And if I fight it, then your husband's lawyer releases everything to the district attorney." Patricia's lips tightened. "And trust me, you don't want that. Roman Kincaid's arrest has kicked over a hornet's nest of corporate corruption. Everyone connected to him is being investigated. The only reason you're not already under scrutiny is because your husband has kept your name out of it." Elena picked up the papers with trembling hands. "He's really thought of everything, hasn't he? Mr. Kane is..." Patricia chose her words carefully. "He's not what anyone expected. The evidence he gathered, the way he documented everything, it's the kind of preparation I've never seen from a civilian. Almost like he'd been waiting for something like this to happen." A knock at the door interrupted them. Patricia's assistant poked her head in, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but he's here." Who's here? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Her heart kicked against her ribs as footsteps approached down the hallway. Cyrus appeared in the doorway, and Elena's breath caught. He wore a charcoal suit she'd never seen before, perfectly tailored to emphasize shoulders that suddenly seemed broader than she remembered. The bruises from Roman's assault had faded to yellowish shadows that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than vulnerable. Patricia, he nodded to the lawyer. Would you give us a moment? Patricia glanced at Elena, who managed a short nod. The lawyer gathered some files and left, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The papers are ready. Cyrus's voice was cool, professional, as if they were discussing a business transaction rather than the end of their marriage. Yes. Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. Your lawyer outdid himself. I'm completely trapped. No. Cyrus moved to the window, adjusting the blinds to let in more light. You trapped yourself? I just made sure there was evidence. How long? When he turned to look at her, she clarified, how long were you watching, gathering evidence? Was any of our marriage real? Or was it all just preparation for this? Our marriage was real. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, maybe, or anger. Until you decided it wasn't enough. Until you decided I wasn't enough. I never what? His calm cracked slightly. Never meant to get caught? Never meant for me to find out you were sleeping with my boss? Never meant for me to see you laugh while he beat me? Each question hit like a physical blow. Elena gripped the edge of the desk, steadying herself. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking perfectly clearly. Cyrus turned back to the window. You made a choice. Several choices, actually. Now you get to live with the consequences. Like you've never made a mistake. Anger sparked through her guilt. You're not perfect, Cyrus. You spent more time with your spreadsheets than with me. I was building us a future. His voice could have frozen fire. Every extra hour, every weekend at the office, it was all for us. For the family we talked about having, for the life we planned together. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. I even had a college fund started, for the kids we'll never have now. The casual mention of their lost future made Elena's eyes burn. We can still, don't. Cyrus finally turned to face her fully. Don't insult us both by pretending there's anything left to save. You made your choice in that club. You chose Roman's excitement over our stability. You chose his money over our love. You chose to watch me bleed and laugh about it. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate even as she said them. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. You're right. It doesn't change anything. He moved to the desk, placing a small recorder next to the divorce papers. This is a copy of everything: the club, the penthouse, all of it. Insurance, in case you decide to fight the terms after all. You don't trust me even for this? I don't trust you at all. He said it without heat, which somehow made it worse. Sign the papers, Elena. Take the settlement. Start over somewhere else. Because if you try to fight this, if you try to drag this out or get revenge, I'll bury you so deep in legal problems you'll never see daylight again. Elena stared at the man before her, this stranger wearing her husband's face. Who are you? Really? I'm exactly who I've always been. He straightened his tie with precise movements. You just never bothered to look past the surface. You saw what you wanted to see, a boring accountant who was beneath you. That was your mistake. And now? What happens now? Now you sign those papers. You take enough money to start over, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle you dreamed of with Roman. You leave this city and never contact me again. His voice softened slightly. It's more than you deserve, but I want this finished. Elena picked up the pen with numb fingers. You'll never forgive me, will you? No. The word fell between them like a stone. Some things can't be forgiven. Some betrayals cut too deep. She signed her name on each marked line, watching as her signature severed the last ties between them. Each stroke of the pen felt like another nail in the coffin of her marriage, her security, her future as she'd imagined it. When she finished, Cyrus gathered the papers without checking them. He trusted her signature even now, when he trusted nothing else about her. Somehow, that made everything worse. Goodbye, Elena. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. A word of advice? Next time you think about betraying someone, look more carefully at who they really are. It might save you from making another terrible mistake. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. Elena sat alone in the sunlit office, surrounded by the wreckage of her choices. Outside, she could hear the city continuing as if nothing had changed, as if her world hadn't just ended with the stroke of a pen. She wondered if this was how Roman had felt, watching his empire crumble in the morning light of his penthouse. She wondered if he'd also underestimated the quiet man with the steady hands and calculating eyes. She wondered if they'd both been blind to the predator hiding behind Cyrus's mild-mannered facade, but mostly, she wondered how she would ever rebuild from the ashes of what she'd burned. The news about Roman Kincaid's arrest dominated every channel. Elena watched from her hotel room as reporters dissected the fall of one of the city's most prominent CEOs. The coverage was relentless footage of Roman being led from his penthouse in handcuffs, interviews with former employees, experts analyzing the company's collapse. Sources close to the investigation reveal a pattern of corporate fraud, drug use, and sexual misconduct, a perfectly coiffed anchor announced. The evidence, reportedly provided by a former employee, includes video recordings of illegal activities at private company events. Elena turned off the TV, but she couldn't escape the images burned into her memory. Roman's face twisted with rage, his careful facade of corporate power stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. The bruises he'd left on her arms had faded, but the fear lingered, fear of what might have happened if Cyrus hadn't arrived when he did. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Maria. They're cleaning out your office. HR says don't bother coming back. I'm so sorry. Of course they'd fire her. She was toxic now, tainted by association with Roman's scandal. No company would touch her after this. Her career, like her marriage, had burned to ash in the flame of her own choices that a knock at the door made her jump. Her heart raced as she approached, memories of Roman's rage still fresh. Who is it? Building management, a woman's voice answered. There's a problem with your payment. Elena opened the door to find an elderly woman in a navy blazer holding a folder. I don't understand. My card cleared yesterday. Your card was declined this morning. The manager's expression held no sympathy. And your husband's office called. He won't be covering any further charges. But the divorce settlement won't be processed for at least 30 days. The manager held out a notice. You need to vacate the room by noon tomorrow. After the manager left, Elena sank onto the bed, the eviction notice crumpling in her fist. She'd burned through her savings in the past 2 weeks, too ashamed to return to the house she'd shared with Cyrus. She'd assumed she could coast on credit cards until the settlement came through. She should have known better. Cyrus had thought of everything, timed everything. He'd trapped her as efficiently as he'd trapped Roman. Using her own actions as the bars of her cage, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Hello, Mrs. Winslow. A man's voice, professional but cold. This is Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit. We need you to come in and answer some questions about your involvement with Roman Kincaid's operations. I wasn't involved in. We have emails suggesting otherwise. Papers rustled in the background. Your husband's evidence package included some very interesting correspondence between you and Mr. Kincaid. Elena's throat closed. My husband? But he said, Mr. Kane has been very cooperative with our investigation. He's provided documentation of numerous illegal activities, including some that directly implicate you in knowledge of corporate fraud. He promised he wouldn't. This isn't about promises, Mrs. Winslow. This is about justice. You can come in voluntarily tomorrow morning, or we can send officers to escort you. Your choice. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, remembering Cyrus's words in the lawyer's office. If you try to fight this, if you try to drag this out or get revenge, I'll bury you so deep in legal problems you'll never see daylight again. She'd thought it was just a threat. Now she understood it was a promise he'd already prepared to keep. Her phone buzzed one final time. A text from another unknown number, but she knew who it was from even before she opened it. I warned you about consequences. The detective is serious about those charges. I suggest you cooperate fully. It's your only chance to avoid joining Roman in prison. See, Elena walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. 20 stories below, the city continued its endless dance, indifferent to her destruction. Somewhere out there, Cyrus was watching his carefully laid plans unfold. The quiet accountant she'd dismissed as boring had orchestrated her complete destruction with the same precision he'd once applied to spreadsheets. She thought about the night that had started it all. The music, the dancing, the thrill of danger in Roman's arms. She'd felt so alive then, so superior to the safe little life she'd built with Cyrus. Now she understood that the danger had been real, but she'd completely misidentified its source. Roman had been obvious in his predatory nature, all flash and surface threat. But Cyrus quiet, patient, methodical. Cyrus had been the truly dangerous one. He'd watched and waited, gathering evidence, building his case, preparing for a moment he must have sensed was coming. Her phone lit up with another text from Maria. Just heard about the investigation. You need a lawyer fast. What happened? What happened? She'd mistaken patience for weakness. She'd assumed that quiet meant soft, that methodical meant boring. She'd laughed while her husband bled, never recognizing that his blood was just another piece of evidence being collected, another strand in the web he was weaving around her. The sun began to set, painting the city in shades of red and gold. In a few hours, she'd have to leave this room. In the morning, she'd face questions about crimes she'd ignored because they hadn't directly involved her. Her career was over, her marriage destroyed, her future uncertain, and somewhere in this glittering city, the man she'd betrayed sat in an office much like the one she'd first seen him in, surrounded by the spreadsheets and documents that had hidden his true nature. She wondered if he felt anything satisfaction, perhaps, or the cold comfort of revenge well planned, but she knew the answer. Cyrus didn't feel anything for her anymore. She'd killed whatever love he'd had when she chose excitement over loyalty, when she'd laughed at his pain, when she'd thrown away everything they'd built for a dance with danger. The city lights began to twinkle on, 1,000 stars planted in concrete and steel. Elena stood at the window, watching night claim the world she'd lost. Tomorrow would bring investigators and accusations, lawyers and consequences. But tonight, she finally understood the magnitude of her mistake, that she'd wanted danger, excitement, something more than ordinary life could offer. She'd found it in Roman's arms, in his private parties, in the thrill of betrayal. But the real danger had been at home all along. Hidden behind gentle smiles and quiet competence, Cyrus had given her exactly what she wanted, a taste of real danger, of genuine consequences. He'd shown her what happened when you underestimated quiet men with patient hearts and steady hands. He'd taught her that true power didn't need to shout, that real danger didn't need to bare its teeth. The lesson had cost her everything, that in the gathering darkness. Elena finally understood that some mistakes couldn't be fixed, some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, some consequences couldn't be escaped. She'd chosen her path that night in the club, with music pulsing through her blood and false courage in her veins. Now she would walk that path alone, carrying the weight of her choices, haunted by the knowledge that she'd never really known the man she'd betrayed until it was far too late. The city lights blurred as tears finally came, but she didn't deserve their relief. She'd wanted more than ordinary life could offer. Now she had exactly what she'd earned, a future built on the ashes of her own betrayal. A lesson learned far too late to matter. Night claimed the city completely, and Elena Winslow stood alone in the darkness, facing the consequences of underestimating a quiet man's capacity for justice, for vengeance, for carefully planned destruction. That she'd danced with danger and lost everything. That it was time to pay the price.